What is the subject of ethics? Ethics seeks to answer the question of what is good and how to establish criteria for evaluating the goodness of actions taken by individuals, organizations, or organizations. Whereas meta-ethics is concerned with the meaning of what we actually mean when we say that something is good, the descriptive ethics tries to compare different answers on how we should act in different situations, while normative action ethics gives us answers to what is good. It has many different approaches to this in its repertoire. Let's have a look at them. One of these is the utilitarian approach in the variant of Jeremy Bentham or John Stuart Mill, developed by Sidgwick and now most popularized by Peter Singer. It offers us a mechanism for comparing the goodness of certain choices. Utilitarians propose that when making decisions, we should evaluate and sum up the benefits and losses experienced by those affected as a key criterion. The best choice is the one that provides the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. Let's imagine we are comparing two meal options, one with meat and one without. I could make my choice based on what I think is good for me, which is one approach a utilitarian might take. People often choose meat based on personal preference, like taste and perceived health benefits, as shown in the study cited in the wider Sustainable Daily, Part 2. However, utilitarians argue that we should also consider the broader consequences of our decisions for others, including both the positive and negative impacts of their well-being or utility. Let's imagine we are comparing two meal options, one with meat and one without. I could make my choice based on what I think is good for me, which is one approach a utilitarian might take. People often choose meat based on personal preference, like taste and perceived health benefits, as shown in the study cited in the wider Sustainable Daily, Part 2. However, utilitarians argue that we should also consider the broader consequences of our decisions for others, including both the positive and negative impacts of their well-being or utility. Consider the meat industry. The privileged few who profit immensely from this lucrative and growing sector see their utility increase. Meanwhile, many consumers derive pleasure, though perhaps not health benefits, from eating meat. According to 2021 Statista survey of 21 countries, 86 of respondents consume around 30 kilos of meat per person per year, with some countries exceeding 80 kilos. But is our overall utility increasing significantly? Utilitarians introduced the concept of diminishing marginal utility. They observed that the same amount of money or food increases the utility of the poor and hungry much more than that of the rich and well-fed. Therefore, as consumption and profits associated with the meat industry increases, the additional utility gained may be minimal compared to the significant increase in well-being that could be achieved by redirecting resources to those in greater need. In addition, our choice to eat meat has a significant impact on the many people who work in the meat industry, some 500,000 to the US alone. These workers are affected by wages and working conditions that are deteriorating even as industry profits rise. Interestingly, despite the sector's rising revenues, workers are facing worsening conditions, possibly due to the cost-cutting and austerity policies. Our food choices also affect the world's hungry, some 828 million people, or 10% of the world's population. Meat production uses resources and water that could otherwise be used to grow crops for direct human consumption. According to the report of IDTechX, current agricultural production could easily feed the world's growing population if the world adopted an entirely plant-based diet. By the way, it's worth noting that the criterion of economic efficiency we have just been praising doesn't apply to meat production either. In terms of efficiency, it takes about 9 calories of energy input, mostly feed crops, to produce just 1 calorie of meat. Similarly, it takes about 5 grams of plant protein to produce 1 gram of meat protein. This inefficiency suggests that the resources used to produce meat could be more effectively used to feed the undiminished population of some 828 million people. The philosopher Peter Singer, born in 1946, would like to add that we should not limit our analysis to the consequences of an action for humans alone, but should also include the animals themselves. Where is our cat? As he argues in his book In Defense of Animals. After all, we consume around 340 million tons of meat per year worldwide, 2021 figures. He believes we should follow the principle of doing the most good we can. See his book, The Most Good You Can Do. Therefore, given the choice between improving our own comfort or contributing to the well-being of others, animals and humans, we should choose the latter. There's also another approach to judging whether an action is good, which requires examination. Is it my duty? In other words, should I do it? Is it my moral duty? Here, the criteria for evaluation are provided by Immanuel Kant, who tells us that an action is good if it is based on a moral norm that satisfies the three criteria of the categorical imperative. Universality, the action should be based on a maxim that can be universally applied without contradiction. Autonomy, the action should stem from the individual's rational will, free from external influences or desires. 3. Humanity is an end. One should never treat humanity, whether in oneself or in others, merely as a means to an end, but always as an end in itself. Let us consider this with an example. Can I buy a commodity that is based on human slave labor? Kant would say no. The universalization of the principle of exploitation of others is impossible. It is against our autonomy. We could not want such a principle. It is also, above all, treating man as a means, violating his dignity. Next, we have the approach of virtue ethics, which, revitalized by the work of Alistair MacIntyre, has re-emerged in modern philosophy after its prominence in antiquity, most notably in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. In virtue ethics, a good action is one based on virtues such as temperance, wisdom, courage, and justice, the so-called cardinal virtues evident in Plato and adopted by Aristotle, which are necessary for the attainment of happiness or daimonia. Let's consider these examples. If I tend to overeat at lunch, virtue ethics sees this as a violation of the virtue of temperance, moderation. If I follow fashion trends out of fear of being ostracized for not owning certain possessions or gadgets, such an action is not good because it is based on fear rather than the virtue of courage in defending one's values. Buying clothes made by people who have not been fairly compensated, for example through exploitative labor or inadequate pay, is considered unjust. According to distributive justice, justitia distributiva, people should receive what they deserve in proportion to their contribution to society. Buying things on a momentary impulse is incompatible with the virtue of practical wisdom, phronesis, because such an action has not been thought out or considered as to whether it is good for me and for humanity in general. Finally, we have the contractarian approach, of which John Rawls is the best known contemporary exponent. In this approach, we evaluate human actions through the lens of rules and contracts that would be rationally accepted by all involved as the basis of these social interactions. We ask whether an action conforms to the principles of the social contract. Is it rational? Would informed people behind a veil of ignorance, unaware of their own position in society, agree to it? Is it fair? Does it satisfy Rawls' two principles of justice? Does it serve the common good? Does it respect the principles of the contract to which individuals have agreed? If I buy cheap products whose production has involved violations of basic human rights, for example, the right to fair wage, equal pay for work of equal value, I am acting against the principles of the social contract. It would be difficult for me to agree behind a veil of ignorance to a social organization that allows the exploitation of certain people. To agree to such a principle would be to accept that I myself could be exploited in this way. In summary, ethics seeks to discover what is good, but it is not alone in this endeavor. Other disciplines, even if they do not focus on it directly, introduce criteria for judging human action as effective or ineffective, as conforming or not conforming to norms, or as satisfying or not satisfying needs, all with the implicit category of good behind them. These disciplines also help us to uncover some of the traps we fell into when judging something as good. For example, when an action is recognized by those with power, authority, or influence, or when it represents the interest of our own group. They also offer solutions that an ethicist would endorse. For example, the principle of efficiency comparable to the virtue of moderation, the internalization of externalities, and the consideration of social needs and norms. Ethics provides us with many interesting solutions of its own by offering different approaches to assessing whether our actions are good. Some of the best known are the utilitarian, deontological, virtue-based, and contractual approaches. As we conclude this lecture on ethical perspectives on sustainable consumption, please reflect on the following questions and share your thoughts in the comments below. Utilitarian approach. How does the utilitarian principle of the greatest good for the greatest number influence your consumption choices? Can you think of an example where you have chosen a product or service that benefits society or the environment, even if it meant a personal sacrifice or was less convenient for you? From a deontological point of view, what moral obligations do you have as a consumer? Do you avoid certain products or companies to uphold your ethical principles? Which virtues are most important for sustainable consumption? How can the practice of virtues such as moderation or justice influence your daily habits? Imagining yourself behind Rawls' veil of ignorance, what consumption norms or policies would you support to ensure fairness and sustainability for all? Which ethical approach, utilitarian, deontological, virtue ethics, or contractarian, do you find most compelling for guiding sustainable consumption, and why? Give an example of a consumption decision you have made that is consistent with one of these ethical frameworks. What motivated you to make this choice? What are the biggest barriers to practicing ethical consumption today? How can individuals and communities address these challenges? How do insight from economics or sociology enhance or challenge these ethical perspectives on sustainable consumption? What are the responsibilities of companies in promoting sustainable consumption? How should they balance profit with ethical considerations? What role should government policy play in promoting ethical consumption? Are there specific policies that you would recommend? Feel free to share your answers and engage with your peers in the comments below. Your reflections will deepen our collective understanding of how ethical theories can inform sustainable consumption in our daily lives. Thank you for listening.